In 2013, Johnny Ive was given complete control over both the hardware and software design for the iPhone. The result was the radically minimal iOS 7, and for the first time, two new iPhones, the 5S and 5C. It ultimately went on to be considered a failure, but the lessons it taught Apple changed their product strategy forever. Hi, I'm Nick Bradley, and if you've seen my videos about how the iPhone names don't make any sense, you may have noticed I never actually addressed the iPhone 5C. So, to quickly address those comments, since it's essentially an iPhone 5 just with a different housing, the iPhone 5C is considered 6th generation, even though it launched alongside the 7th generation iPhone 5S. If you want to know what I'm talking about, check out those other videos, but for now, let's talk about why the iPhone 5C failed. Failure is of course relative. In Apple's case, that means selling millions of units. And even calling it the worst iPhone ever is also relative. It was still an iPhone, and if you owned one, odds are you have fond memories of it and enjoyed it. Even I have good memories from working the launch event. But the first reason it failed had to do with its biggest appeal, that candy-colored plastic shell. Apple had cultivated a reputation for creating premium products and experiences that warranted a premium price. With the iPhone 5C, you were losing that premium design and feel with really no upside. Apple probably could have gotten away with this design had they not marketed the fact that it was unapologetically plastic so much. The plastic housing was never a selling point for the 3G or 3GS, for example, and this ended up causing people to associate the C and 5C with cheap rather than color. And to make matters worse, the price wasn't cheap. Customers weren't actually saving any money with this phone. Ever since the iPhone 3G, customers grew accustomed to the newest iPhone starting at $199 on a 2-year contract. Then, with the iPhone 3GS, Apple would keep the old model around at $99, and then eventually would keep the 2-year-old model around for free. So by the time the iPhone 5 launched, the year-old 4S dropped to $99, and the even older iPhone 4 was free with a 2-year contract. A year later, when the iPhone 5S was introduced, people had been led to believe the iPhone 5 would stick around at $99 on contract. Instead, Apple discontinued the iPhone 5 altogether and replaced it with the iPhone 5C. In fact, the iPhone 5S itself is another reason for why the iPhone 5C didn't sell as well as Apple expected. There was quite a significant difference between the two phones. The 5S had the much more premium design, 64-bit processing and a motion coprocessor, an improved camera with brand new slow motion capabilities, and Touch ID, which was a bigger deal than you may realize. Before Face ID and Touch ID, the only way to lock your phone was with a passcode. As you may have guessed, or perhaps remember, a lot of people found that too cumbersome and never set it up.
In fact, in our research, about half of smartphone customers do not set up a passcode on their device. And they really, really should.
So all that for just $100 more meant there was much more demand for the 5S. And even though Apple was no longer selling the iPhone 5, that didn't mean you couldn't still buy one. Some third-party retailers and wireless carriers still had inventory available, and those who truly wanted to save some money could buy a pre-owned iPhone 5 for less than the price of a 5C. Another reason the iPhone 5 is considered a failure was because Apple struggled to compete in emerging markets like India. The $550 price made it much more expensive than phones like the Google Nexus 5 and budget-level devices like the $179 Moto G. A year later, when the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus was announced, Apple replaced both the 16GB and 32GB iPhone 5C with an 8GB model. Even with another $100 knocked off the price, it failed to gain any traction in the new markets Apple was targeting. Not only that, but the 8GB model was described as unusable, since it actually had less than 5GB of available space after iOS 8 was installed. Tim Cook would end up admitting in an earnings call that they were surprised by the sales ratio between the 5C and 5S, which caused the company to end up with an overstock of the 5C and a shortage of the 5S. Also, not that customers would have known it at the time, but the 5C was one of the worst iPhones in terms of software support. It only received 3 major iOS updates. Every iPhone since then has typically received 5 major updates, including the 5S it sold alongside. Apple quickly learned from the mistakes they made with the 5C and fixed their problems in 2 ways. Firstly, with the iPhone SE. This was a spiritual successor to the iPhone 5C, and it was better in every way. It had the same premium design of the 5S, so it didn't feel cheap. It had the same chip as the current flagship, iPhone 6S, which made it just as fast and powerful, but for $200 less. It was also released 6 months after the iPhone 6S, instead of alongside it, and therefore it didn't split any sales during initial demand. The iPhone SE was designed for budget-conscious users without actually feeling like a budget phone. The next spiritual successor could be considered the XR. It was the cheaper version of the more premium iPhone XS at the time. It had an LCD display instead of OLED, thicker bezels, and only one camera. And the most obvious similarity with the 5C was that it came in several colors. But unlike the 5C, the XR shared several of the more premium features with the XS, such as the processor and Face ID. And with a $250 price difference between the models, it made the XR the far more popular option among consumers. The iPhone XR was another example of the 5C done right. All of this stemmed from a new marketing philosophy Apple first realized with the 4S. The 4 and 4S looked identical, and so many customers opted for the cheaper, identical-looking iPhone 4 over the 4S. And since smartphones have become a sort of status symbol, nobody could really tell if you had the new iPhone or not. Apple wanted to avoid the same mistake with the iPhone 5S. They wanted people to be able to tell that you have the new iPhone. By replacing the iPhone 5 with the colorful 5C, and by giving the 5S a unique new gold color and a distinctive new home button, it was easier for people to notice you have the new iPhone. This strategy continues today. Every new iPhone has new color variants, and usually some physical differences, such as the camera layout or size of the notch. So, another way to look at all this is the 5S very likely sold better with the 5C in the lineup instead of the 5 to contend with. That's why today, the Pro phones only stick around for a year. Every year, a new Pro model iPhone comes out, and the old Pro model is discontinued, whereas the non-Pro models stick around and get that same $100 discount we've all become accustomed to.
This is by far our best iPhone lineup ever.
All of this together makes for what I believe is one of the strongest phone lineups available. Apple has a phone for almost every budget, and none of them feel cheap. Thanks so much for watching. Here's that video I mentioned about how iPhone names don't make sense, and here's a different one. I'll see you over there.